Okay, so just as a little bit of background, I guess, I saw Tiffany's work on social media, and there was so much there that clearly needed to be more widely talked about, partly because the combination of different intersectional elements and talking about um, disability and race and gender in education doesn't seem to be done much slash enough. And maybe Tiffany will say a bit more about that. But thanks so much for coming, Tiffany. Tiffany is a child community and educational psychologist and a proud neurodivergent practitioner who recently finished her PhD on which this presentation is based. So that's more than enough from me. I'm going to switch off my camera and my mic. And Tiffany, the floor is yours. And thanks again.
Thank you so much, Richard. I really appreciate having the opportunity to come and share my research with everybody. So, as Richard has just explained, I'm an educational psychologist. I work with children, young people, and families, children from nursery age right through to secondary and further education. So I work with a lot of families, and a lot of what I speak about, I draw on that experience. But Richard also mentioned I am a neurodivergent practitioner, so I pull on my own lived experience. But I also have children who are neurodivergent, and the motivations for me really behind my research was my daughter being diagnosed with autism at a very young age. And the impact, I guess, of putting her through school when she's masking her autism, having a diagnosis and people not really understanding that and not actually believing it as well. And this kind of treatment that I had as a parent and her experiences, I thought it was really important to explore that, thinking about those intersections, thinking about intersectionality, something that has not really been thought about in autism research much before. I wanted to pull everything together, my personal experience and my professional experience, um, to do my thesis for my educational psychology doctorate. So, my research was exploring the lived experiences of masking and camouflaging Black autistic girls in UK education. Okay. So sorry, the plan for the session today, I'm not great with tech, not a millennial, so I keep telling people. So the plan for the session today is I want to think about the literature that I looked at first of all. I'm going to talk about the theoretical framework that I used in my research. Then I'll discuss some of my research findings, and then I'll think about the implications for practice within education. And then we're going to end with a question and answer session, which hopefully we can have a nice discussion. So when it comes to the literature, there really was not much on Black autistic girls who mask in UK education. In fact, there wasn't anything. I had my literature question, and that was, what do we know about Black autistic girls masking in schools? Found nothing, so I decided to ask a few more questions of the literature. There was not really much about the Black autistic experience, full stop. I found one paper. And when it comes to thinking about autistic masking and camouflaging, there were a few research papers out there. But again, these are terms that are fairly new. So there really hasn't been much that's been researched. It's probably only been the last sort of 10 years. And the research focused more on females. Very little is known about the experience of males. And then I found that just in general, autism research focusing on intersectionality is really limited. We have research on females and the female experience, but there's nothing around faith or socioeconomic status, language. There's really nothing else out there. So I decided to focus on gender and race and specifically Black girls. And I looked at just the UK because this was for my educational psychology doctorate, and I really wanted to see how we can support girls within our roles as educational psychologists. So, thinking about the theoretical framework that I decided to use, um, a lot of historically, a lot of the research on autism doesn't come from an autistic perspective. and we're not really including the autistic voice. So I wanted to make sure that my research was different. I wanted to look at that unique lived experience, and I felt that doing interviews with autistic girls would be the best way. And the best way of analysing that data was, for me, using IPA, so interpretive phenomenological analysis. And IPA really focuses on lived experience and thinking about it through the life world. So, the life world being how we make sense of things like space, time, intersubjectivity, and our embodied experience. And I thought when you think about the autistic experience, and differences are spoken about a lot, differences in how information is processed, a lot of things that are spoken about is time and space and embodiment when you think about sensory sensitivities and differences, and also that intersubjectivity. So I thought IPA really is the best form of analysis for my research. But then we are not individuals without our environment and society. So I really wanted to think not just about how the girls saw their experience, but I also wanted to think about how society and their environment influenced their individual experience. So to do that, I used intersectionality theory and disability critical race theory. Now, intersectionality theory is a prism or a lens that Kimberly Crenshaw developed in the late 80s. This is a theory or a prism that she developed to think about how different aspects of identity can overlap and intersect to create a unique experience. And what she was thinking specifically was about Black women and how there's that multiple discrimination with being Black and also being a woman, and what that means and how unique that experience is. So I wanted to use that theory to help me to understand what the girls were experiencing, but also disability critical race theory, which brings together disability studies and critical race theory to provide a lens through which we can see how ableism and racism work together, and they're working together to discriminate and marginalize. So, thinking about the systems and the structures that we have within society that normalize the concept of whiteness. So, those who can claim whiteness as being superior, as that being the superior race, and everything else being judged against that. And also ability, so seeing intelligence as its superior, and anything that doesn't meet that criteria being marginalized and seen as a deficit. So disability critical race theory and intersectionality theory I wanted to use together so that I could really think about the influence of power, oppression, privilege, racism, and ableism on the autistic experience and on the girls' experiences specifically. So I interviewed girls who were aged 16 and 17. And the point of that was that they could look back at their experience in school and really reflect on how they felt they were masking and, what was happening to them in school. And when I analysed the data, I came up with 5 different themes. So the first theme was around acceptance and belonging. The next was around how they were managing social expectations and norms and the impact that had on their experience. Um, the third was navigating the intersection of autism, race, and gender when you're a Black masking autistic girl. Then there was the challenges they had with sensory sensitivities and overload. And lastly, the significant role of support and understanding. Now, I'm not able to go into each of the themes because of time, because there was quite a lot of data that came out. But I wanted to just focus on 2 of them. So the first one being acceptance and belonging. Now, for all of the girls, they spoke about a time in school where they were really happy, just really enjoyed, mainly nursery, where they really enjoyed being at school. But then they got to around year 3 and year 4, where things changed and they started to notice differences between themselves and their peers. And the ways in which they noticed those differences were because they were called names. One of the girls here, sorry, I haven't explained this slide here, just some quotes from these themes. some of the things that the girls said. So one of the girls saying that she was seen as weird. Mia was called mentally ill, and that was just because of the way that she expressed herself. And the way she explained her friendships at school was that she was always around the popular girls, but she was kind of on the outskirts. So she was part of the friendship group, but she didn't understand really what was going on within the group. She said they were very bitchy and she didn't understand why. So she'd copy some of those behaviors, but then she was also herself being very expressive and quite animated, and people just thought that was mentally ill. So she didn't really change the way that she behaved because of that, but Poppy had something similar, and she said that she decided to assimilate with her peers. She dropped some of her hobbies because her hobbies were seen as childish. So I think it was the littlest pet shop toys that she used to play with, and she had a YouTube channel devoted to it, but she stopped all of that to try to fit in with her peers. And what she said as well is that because of her sensory sensitivities, she would always wear the same clothes. And she was in a school that was an independent school. They didn't wear a uniform. It was a majority white school and a faith school. And she noticed the differences between her and her peers in terms of like class and money, where they were wearing certain brand clothes and she wasn't. And that really she had that no pain made no importance to her. She just wanted to be comfortable, but she ended up being uncomfortable just to try to fit in. She also explains that she didn't have any emotions because whenever people called her weird, she would always laugh it off and make a joke about it just to try and fit in. So she had no emotions. She couldn't name a single emotion when she felt one. And she said that she internalized a lot of this and became very stressed, very anxious. She wasn't sleeping. Her mental health really deteriorated. She wasn't attending school. And when she was attending school, she was falling asleep. So they were very concerned about her. She also self harmed quite badly. And she ended up in an inpatient facility for 6 months. And she was only 14 at this time. And she said that this is one of her quotes here at the bottom of the slide. I just thought I was really weird and that like my brain didn't work properly. I had never ever seen like a black autistic girl. And for Poppy, she really struggled when it came to representation because she was a mixed race girl. And she said that she wasn't accepted in the black community because of the hobbies that she had, the music that she enjoyed, that didn't really fit in. However, it did fit in when it came to the autistic community. So she felt that she was not black enough to be black, but not white enough to be white. Those were the words that she used. So she really, really lacked this feeling of belonging and of being accepted wherever she was. And that really had a detrimental impact on her mental health. All of the girls also spoke about teachers and how teachers had no knowledge when it came to neurodivergent pupils. They didn't just talk about themselves, they spoke about other pupils that they knew had other conditions who were like stimming in class or just not paying attention, and teachers interpreting that as them causing trouble and then receiving sanctions for things like not giving eye contact or for stimming or not paying attention as well. But they attributed that lack of understanding to training. They never spoke about their teachers as wanting to be horrible, just that their teachers didn't understand and that they really need to have that training on neurodivergence. The girls also spoke about being excluded and all forms of exclusion. So, internal exclusion, being in isolation, um, managed moves where schools send children to other schools under an arrangement, um, also being sent to alternative provisions. One of the girls was bullied so badly that her mum took her out of school and home educated her. So, for all of the girls, they really struggled with that acceptance and belonging and lots of different feelings of rejection because of things that happened in school. And that really had an impact on how they saw themselves and their mental health. Um, Moving on to the next theme that I wanted to speak about, it's navigating that intersection of autism, race, and gender. Before they see the autism, they're always going to see my race. I thought this is why it's really different to be black and autistic than white and autistic. And this is a quote that came from Poppy's interview. Sorry, not Poppy, it was Mia. Mia used this quote 3 times, I think, in the space of a few minutes, because we were talking about her, a lot of teachers saying that she had an attitude and that she was aggressive. And what she was trying to explain is that this is the angry black girl stereotype, where rather than seeing her behavior as actual communication of her distress, it was seen as that black angry girl. So using that racial stereotype rather than actually seeing it for what it was. All of the girls spoke about this stereotype, and Lily here says with a lot of black girls, it's kind of like you're more masculine. That's like loads of people just see you as that way. So when you're like sharing signs of distress, it's like, oh, she's just being, typically angry and all that stuff. And as she's explained, that's really damaging, a really damaging stereotype, especially when you're autistic, because you may be struggling with verbally articulating that. You're articulating it through your behaviors, through your body movements. And we know in society that that is not seen as acceptable. And when it comes to the classroom, it's not seen as acceptable at all when you're told to sit still, stay in your seats. A lot of our younger children having to sit on spots on the carpet and not move from them. So when you're trying to communicate that distress and being sanctioned for it, what does that communicate to you as an individual? But for these girls, it was about that racial stereotype as well being used, rather than thinking, okay, maybe we need to be assessing these children, maybe we need to be looking for a different explanation and actually trying to support. All of the girls spoke about racism. They all experienced racial microaggressions. Some of the racism they experienced was actual things like using the N word, which I found quite shocking. At my age, I found that quite shocking that that's still happening now. And not having the support in school, not having the support from adults when it came to racism, when it came to ableism and the misogyny that they all experienced as well. Some of these things that they experienced were not just from peers, it was also from adults in schools, from teachers, from parents, but nothing was being done about it. One of the girls, Poppy, this is her quote. If they saw black dirt anywhere, they'd be like, that's you, you're going on the table. If there was a black poster, you're getting all over the posters. It's meant to be a white background. These are the sort of comments that she was receiving on a regular basis. She also said that if they were doing like geography lessons and they were talking about things like colonialism, she would speak up and she said she was very passionate. But normally her voice tone is quite even. She said she doesn't really express her emotions on her face. But when it comes to something she's passionate about, she'd speak much faster and be quite animated. And she said that people would laugh and snigger at her and they would say to her, oh, calm down, like, oh, we're not angry with you. And the way that she explained it is this is again, this was a racial microaggression. But for Poppy, this was really difficult. She didn't know how to verbalize things, who to go to, how to deal with that. And because she was mimicking people's behaviors and the way that other people were communicating, she just assumed that there was something inherently wrong with her. Um, and lastly, this is Poppy again. She spoke about her hair. And all of the girls, every single one of the girls that I interviewed spoke about their hair. It came up in every single theme. And when you think about a black girl's or a black woman's identity, our hair is something that's very, very intrinsic to our identity. And when Poppy spoke about her hair, she said she really struggled with the texture of her hair and she referred to it as knotty. And if you know, with curly hair, her hair is very similar to mine. Having to detangle curly hair is very difficult and time consuming and something that she found painful. So it was something she didn't want to do. She'd wear her hair out, and she said whenever she wore her hair out, people would put their hands in it. So there was the racial microaggression of putting your hand in somebody's hair, in a black person's hair when they haven't given you permission. But there's also that sensory sensitivity around what that feels like, the texture of her hair, and how she felt about the texture of her hair and managing her hair. And also around communication, because she thought that if somebody's got their hands in my hair, then maybe I should be doing that to them. So she's pulled this girl's hair back on one occasion, and the girl got really mad at her, and she didn't understand the reason why this girl was mad. And she said, I was like, you just spent an hour touching my hair when I told you no. She also said no one had hair like me, and I wanted my hair to like flow down rather than being puffed up, like it would just never work. But when I did, people would just put their hands in it. So there was that trying to fit in with her peers in terms of having long, straight hair. There's the racial microaggression, there's not understanding the communication. And I think that just shows how we can't separate identity, how those experiences really intersect and overlap. And that was just one of the sort of intersectional experiences that the girls explained. So I want to move on now to think about those societal level understandings. Um, when we think about there's a long history of oppression and discrimination against women, Black people, and disabled people. Um, we also have structures within our society. And I've used this image here of Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems model because it's one that we use quite often as educational psychologists. When we're supporting children, we really think about those systems around the child because all of these different systems have an impact on developments. And this model has been adapted to think about Black youth. And when we think about these systems, all of our structures in society, they're based on what is seen as normal. And as I'd explained earlier on with disability critical race theory, that shows that this is the normal, what we see as normal is based on concepts of whiteness and ability. And when we think about, for instance, our medical model, it's based on deficits. We don't talk about strengths, we talk about deficits from those concepts. And then we think of our justice system, it's the same. Our education system, it's the same. So within these systems, we have policies that discriminate and marginalize. And when I thought about the girls' experiences, these are these are things that have influenced the discrimination and marginalization that they've experienced. I've also included here the pyramid of hate. And the pyramid of hate starts with biased attitudes. And if we think that we are all exposed to society, we're all exposed to these systems, especially mass media. Um, so we all have biased attitudes, we're exposed to them. There's also the acts of bias that comes above biased attitudes, discrimination, bias motivated violence, and lastly, genocide. And when we think about violence and genocide, it seems quite extreme. However, we need the biased attitudes at the bottom of this pyramid to uphold the things at the top. And we know biased attitudes exist, and these things at the top, genocide, is something that exists currently now. So I did mention there being a long history of oppression and discrimination, but we do know these are things that are current and in our society now. So these are the things I thought about in my thesis. I've written obviously an awful lot more in the thesis, but these are all the things that really shaped the girls' experiences and shape all children's experiences throughout education. And it's really what I've tried to think about and draw on when thinking of practical implications. So I'll move on to that now. When I think about practical implications, I think about that at two different levels. So the individual level, so this is how we as educators and professionals can really support individuals within education. So we have to really start with ourselves, thinking about ourselves and considering our own biases and how that might be influencing our interactions with students and also our colleagues. But how does that influence how we interact with our students? Maybe some of the assumptions that we make about our students and their families. Um, Also thinking about our identity and how that has an impact on how our students and families might interact with us. As professionals and educators, we come with a certain amount of power with our job titles, and it's really important to think about how that's picked up by groups who are marginalised and the kind of supports that people might ask for, because we often rely on people asking for supports, but we really do need to try to make sure that we have that level playing field so it makes it easier for us to be able to support. Because we do have to remember we have that power in our positions and we have expertise, but the people that we're trying to support, they also have expertise in their lived experience, and they also know what is reality for them in terms of what support they need and how we can support them. A question that we can ask ourselves is, are we projecting neurotypical or neuronormative ideals of social interactions within our teaching methods, the questions that we use, assignments that we might set, and those expectations in the classroom? Because a lot of what the girls spoke to me about was about the expectations for eye contact. When you're doing role plays, like how could that be made a bit easier if you have that sort of anxiety or group work? How can we really be supporting children and young people there? Having neuro-affirmative approaches, and that's really thinking about accepting and honouring individuals for their differences and not trying to change them, not trying to make them neurotypical or to fit those societal expectations and norms. Adapting teaching methods and resources in the curriculum, and making sure that we're using methods and have expectations that are clear and structured, and the materials that we're using are multisensory. Just developing consistency, and as I said before, respecting and honouring communication preferences as well, because not everybody's going to want to verbally articulate things, but we may have other ways of sharing and communicating that doesn't involve talking. Um, I've written down here celebrating different cultures, faiths, and languages, because a lot of time we learn about different cultures, but we don't necessarily celebrate. So that's something that should be really incorporated as well. And really ensuring that we have those breaks, that individuals have different types of breaks as well. So movement breaks, talking breaks, brain breaks, just lots of different things that we can put in place. So basically those reasonable adjustments for individuals. But I've got here as well about implications at an organisational level, because we need to support individual children and make sure that we're doing is tailored for them and personalised. But to really effect change, we need to really work at that systemic and organisational level. So we're working at a level where we're ensuring that we do have inclusive environments, we're challenging social inequities, making sure that our disability departments, and I'm thinking more of a higher education here, but that reasonable adjustments are being made. And I think, like I said before, we often rely on people coming to us to ask for support. But that is really, really difficult when you need help, because there's the anxiety of asking for it. Do I need to provide you with evidence that I need reasonable adjustments? Can that just be given to me based on my need? And how could we be asking, how can we be approaching individuals and offering that support, or making things more universally and easily accessible rather than relying on somebody to ask for it? Um, I've put here ensuring that we have safe, calming sensory environments, things that are accessible to individuals, and making sure that we're acknowledging and tackling all forms of discrimination within settings, and that can be done through developing anti-racism policies, yes, but also other discrimination policies within our settings. We want to make sure we've always got autistic-led or informed psychoeducation. And that's something that needs to be continuous and embedded within our settings. It cannot just be a one-off training that we're relying on. We need to hold people accountable as well through maybe line management or setting goals. And our training has to also involve training on intersectionality and that cultural sensitivity, so that we're really supporting that understanding and supporting with how to approach things in a sensitive way. And lastly, I would say that we often talk about having diversity within staff members in schools and within educational settings, but that needs to be through all levels of our staff, so in our senior leadership teams as well. And it can't just be representation, it also has to be developing that sort of organizational culture where people feel empowered to be able to speak out and to tackle all forms of discrimination. Because with one of the girls, she had a black deputy head teacher, but he didn't do that for her. And his behaviour very much came across as he was very scared and that he might upset people if he did. So representation is key, but we also need to make sure that we're empowering people within these positions to be able to act as well and to share their diversity in thinking as well. So, lastly, I would just say I've explained a few different implications, and we do have many barriers within education, resources and money being one. That's spoken about a lot and is very real since austerity. But one thing that we do have that costs nothing is our humanity. So I just want to end with this quote from Martin Luther King, which is make a career of humanity, commit yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. You'll make a better person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. Because we all have humanity. None of us are born with these biased attitudes. It's something that we learn. But as it's something we learn, it's something we can unlearn as well. So I just want to end with that. And I guess I can open up for any questions or comments that people have. And I have put my social media handles here if there's anything people want to carry on afterwards. If we don't have enough time, I'm quite happy to answer questions. So I'll have a look at the chat. I don't know if we have any questions.
Uh, there's nothing there yet, or one or two comments, just
Okay.
people looking forward to things. First of all, thanks so much for that. You covered a lot of ground, actually, really accessibly, but also quite quickly. And when I said at the beginning that I was looking forward to hearing you talk, in a way, I was kind of braced as well. Because obviously expecting there to be negative stories, but stories that we can learn from, and then you translated that into actual changes that we can make. As people kind of gather their thoughts, I can see we've got a couple of hands up already. As people gather their thoughts,
Shall I stop sharing?
yeah, you
That
can
will be
do,
helpful. Yeah.
unless you want to increase your followers. But just as a really quick kind of starter one, if you were queen for a day, obviously some of the things that you're pointing to are kind of cultural and systemic, and they're big things. But if you could pick out two or three things that you would like to implement quickly that would have an ongoing impact, what would you do? What would be the top of your wish list?
I think it would be around that diversity in leaders and in staff. And when I say diversity, it's not just like, oh, we've got a black face that's on a, booklet or brochure. It's about um, having different ethnicities, having different ages, neurodiversity, just different ways of thinking and also different experiences. And I would say, just from like coming off of a doctorate, there were only 16 of us on this doctorate, but there wasn't much diversity. We were mainly women, mainly young, not including myself. I was the oldest there. I was the only parent. And I think when you're a parent of children who have special educational needs, you have that very different perspective. And I just think, we need those different perspectives when we're on a leadership, when you're somebody in a position of power, you really need to have those different ways of thinking and being more creative in the things that we do. So yeah, that's definitely something I think I would want to do straight away.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting one. I'm a parent governor at my daughter's primary school. One of my small wins is they no longer use the word ability on any of their documentation.
Oh, love that.
But that involved a kind of a wider discussion and kind
Yeah.
of how that works. But then also at the same time, the school is pretty monocultural in a
Mm.
sense. It's a rural school, and but yeah, I mean they're doing their best. It's really interesting. Okay, I'll stop hogging the floor. Please raise a digital hand or say in the chat if you'd like to ask a question. If you don't want to have your question, if you don't want to be on film or recorded, then please post something in the chat if you'd like to ask. I've seen a couple of hands going up. Anjani, I saw your hand first. Up to you.
Hi. Can you hear
Hi.
me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Tiffany. That was exactly my thoughts in terms of I'm a speech and language therapist by background,
Oh, amazing.
and just seeing, like, I remember being a student and trying to fight for the same similar things exactly what you're doing, and not having many people to look up to, and it being a very topic of, like, whenever I brought it to the higher educators, they always saw it as like an add-on, and they never took it seriously
Mm.
until a few years ago with the BLM movement, and then they started doing a little bit, but then it never carried on. And I think that was, so I was a student 5 years ago, and then working in the profession, in the speech therapy profession, I found it really difficult to a point that I'm thinking of leaving the profession,
Mm.
um, because it is such a middle class white field, and my body, like the body Royal College of Speech and Language Therapy, they have been found to be quite unhelpful in polite terms, and my struggle, like, maybe this is a more discussion because I've worked internationally, so I've seen this. I've seen specifically in America. I've spoken to Black psychotherapists who have spoken so highly about how their model works, and it gave me hope because I'm very, like, not unhopeful, but um, I don't know if it's the UK. We can't get it right. I don't know. It seems like there's a handful of us that are all on the same page, but the
Mm.
handful doesn't equate to the majority to making change. So when I have spoken to, and it's more the states where their their inclusion model, their race, how it's so, well, in some parts, I'm not saying all the states, but like the people that I spoke to, and
Yeah.
they how they were so, how they said it worked. And
Mm.
I don't know, because I feel like in the UK with our professions we just go round and round and round, and I just don't know how we're going to get to there, because
Mm.
the people in charge, or the people that have the big power, just um, they are they're very dismissive of my lived experiences. They're dismissive of when you're trying to help. They're dismissive
Mm.
of you. They use you for. They don't pay you. They just, it's just not a welcoming um, space. And there is a few of us that are great in terms
Yeah.
of trying to push this forward, but it's very consuming. And you're a parent, so you know that. And I'm not a parent. So I can only imagine how consuming it is for you. But
Yeah.
I don't, I just, yeah, I think it's come to a point where I'm just like kind of just going to start my own thing, because I don't know, I just don't know how to keep asking for help when they keep denying it. I
Mm.
don't know if you felt the same thing, or
I was about to say what I think I'm hearing is you're quite jaded with the system,
yeah, yeah.
which I think is quite can be quite common.
Mm,
I think what gives me hope is that it's like having these kind of conversations
yeah,
and knowing that people are interested and do want to hear.
yeah.
And like you said, there are more of you.
Mm,
Speech and language therapists who are on that same page and are
mm,
really trying to push and make that difference. And I
mm,
think it's really, us all kind of joining together and trying to make the
mm,
difference. And one thing I
mm,
would say is with the girls, even though, they had some negative experiences, they also had some positive experiences with
that's good.
professionals. Yeah,
Mm,
individual people. And, we have, yes, our system is not great. We all know that,
mm,
but we can still use ourselves.
yeah.
So those interactions that you have with children and families, just
Mm,
making sure that you make them the
mm,
best that you can.
mm,
whilst also we're trying to push for that systemic change too. But I do understand it gets, oh, you want things to change now.
No, but there is a lot of I've seen more as the years go by, more people just doing their own thing, which then makes a difference, because I've seen like there's a language therapist called Warda, and I don't know if you've heard of her, but she does something where she does Black Autistic Detox, and it's like, I think it's a female only place, I'm not sure, but there are like people have created their own space to bring that sense of community, to support each other, because if we listen more to the outside noise or how the reality is, it kind of just brings us down.
Yes, yeah, but no, I mean, there's support in numbers as well. We get together and we create the communities, but we keep pushing to make that systemic change.
Yeah, and your research is so good. I'm going to try and
you.
get it out there in my own capacity and push forward for that.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anjani. I've also seen there is a question in the chat, but Claire, Claire Betson, I saw your hand first. So over to you, Claire.
Hiya, can you hear me?
Yes, hi Claire.
Hi, sorry. So I wanted to say thank you so much. That was first. I want to say thank you for those young girls for making my inner child feel seen and heard. You know, everything they said was relatable. And I think as someone that was institutionalized at 9, for similar things, I think it was and then have worked in the education setting, fighting against those biases and things, to now be a therapist. But more importantly, I think as an ADHD person, I had to write this down because I'm a parent. And it's so hard to navigate, I think, as a parent, when you are trying to liaise with people in education about your child, when you are trying to navigate processing and things, as an autistic person, the whole processes aren't very, what's the word, accessible.
Yeah.
And we already know the prevalence of an autistic parent having an autistic child. So the barriers that are put up for us as parents are phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I think schools don't really listen to the parents' voice. We do when, we do when it's a white child, and I can say that from the perspective of working in schools, because how the behaviours and things, they align more to the DSM-5. But when we're speaking about our Black children, the alignment doesn't necessarily fit strictly into the DSM-5. So when we're advocating for our children and things, I think we kind of get, as parents, we kind of get overlooked, because sometimes the racial side of it is, oh, that's how Black children are, like you say about stereotypes, without actually unpicking that, hold on, this isn't how my child is. So my child, for example, showed signs of aggression, was aggressive verbally. And for me to open my mouth and say that to a white teacher was, I couldn't do it. I didn't want to say, oh, my child can be verbally aggressive, because I was already preempting the stereotype. Yeah. So I don't really know what I was trying to say, but yeah, I think the parental voice, us that are parenting Black children as well, the way in which we seek information and liaise with educators, that really we need to be given some kind of grace. We need to be overstood. People need to actually overstand that some of the things that our children are going through or presenting with at home from a cultural perspective are different, And do think as well, just adding on that, I believe that like my child super masks at school. Absolutely, there's like, it's like telephone voice. It's like,
Okay.
yeah, is that even my child? And I
Mm,
think they worry about the criticism that falls, that the racialized stuff falls
yeah.
back on their shoulders. And
Because it's more to think about, isn't it? It's not just how am I communicating in terms of maybe autism, but it's also around how am I going to be perceived in terms of my race or ethnicity.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
Thank you, Claire, because
thank
I
you.
think I didn't really mention that as well about parents. Um, about listening to parents, especially when it comes to masking, because a lot of the times children are coming home and the behaviors are completely different. It's something that school are not seeing. So if they're not seeing it, is that really happening? Or, okay, well, that's not really a problem here, but actually it can be supported in school. So it's not a problem at home. But then, yeah, thinking about parents, especially when you're Black or you're coming from another minoritized group, how you're perceived and not wanting to play into that stereotype, because
Yeah,
I'm similar. And as a professional, when people say to me, oh, this child's aggressive, my head is like, oh, okay, what do you mean by aggressive? What does that look like? Because I'm in my head, I'm thinking, is this an assumption? Is this really what's happening? And I know
yeah,
myself as a parent, I don't want to use that word either, because it
yeah.
has connotations. And
Yeah, and then I'm
yeah, so
as
I
an
hear what you're
ADHD,
saying.
yeah, as an ADHDer then as well, I'm masking even more because I'm
Yes.
masking because I do not want the school to, or professionals to misinterpret me
Yeah.
as a Black ADHDer. So the whole thing really, and it impacts both of us negatively. Well, all of us,
Yes.
the school included, when we
Yeah.
can't just sit there and be, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Claire. Thank you for sharing that as well. Personal.
Yeah, thank you. Um, there's lots of praise in the comments and people for whom your
Oh,
work
thank
really
you.
resonates. We can come to that sort of over time, and we can send you the transcript of that later
Oh,
on.
amazing.
Um, there's one set of questions from Charlotte,
Hmm.
which is how do we, there's two sets of questions here. One is how do we encourage or find that diversity in staffing at all levels? It's something I so rarely see in knowing how many global majority families find approaching a white Senko challenging, as there isn't that cultural affirmation and understanding. But how do we get people into that role? How do we change the makeup of
Mm.
obviously of schools and at all levels? And the second one, and she said maybe this is not your focus now, but how do we improve the understanding of different cultural presentations of autism? As it's clear from statistics that the global majority are massively underrepresented in diagnosis statistics. So leadership and cultural understandings and cultural differences in and around
Yeah.
disability and autism.
Big questions, but good ones. Yeah, I think in terms of leadership, no, it's something a school I worked in were really thinking about. And we looked at things like recruitment, how we were putting recruitment out, the sort of selection. How do I explain? Like when you're doing interviews, how you interview staff, because sometimes that can put people off when there's lots of different rounds of interviews, or if people are expecting to do a face-to-face. There's things around how you can put out your adverts, who you're asking for, the language that you use that might get people in. But also going to different organizations to try to advertise for staff and speaking, I guess, to your own staff as well about who they might know and be able to recommend. I don't have a clear answer to that one because it is quite a difficult one. But I would say if you're thinking about your communities and who you have in your communities, just making sure that the children in your communities are represented in the staff. And it doesn't always have to be around ethnicity, it's also age and the experience that people have. Because I do know myself, when I was trying to be a teaching assistant in a school and I didn't have a degree, I was just seen as a parent, and I was told I didn't have any qualifications. But then I had a school that gave me an opportunity, and it's because they put me with children. They put me to do a task with children, and the children recommended that I got the job. So it was one way of them being able to see that I could actually do that work, rather than looking at maybe criteria and ticking off lists. And so just trying to think of creative ways of being able to recruit. But also, sorry, secondly, how we improve understanding of cultural representation. Oh, I think some of that comes through training. So things like, you know, attending this today, thinking about things from specific backgrounds can be quite helpful. But this is a much bigger question when we're thinking about the sort of diagnostic criteria that we have, like Claire was mentioning earlier. We don't all meet that DSM-5, and we do know a lot of the medical model and what's set up there is just about deficits, which if you're masking does not help, but also it being based on white middle-class boys and how females don't necessarily fit that, and other types of cultures. So I think, you know, there is a lot around diagnostics and training of clinicians to be recognizing different cultural presentations as well. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
As a lead on from that, because we have clinical psychology degrees at Lancaster, and we've talked about this a little bit, and they've tried to work really hard in recruiting a much more diverse cohort, and they've actually been quite successful. Also, at the same time, the people that have then come in through those cohorts have started to recognize problems within the system itself and within the teaching and curriculum and so on.
Yes.
So obviously people through the door is one thing, and that, as you say, that recruitment thing does make a really big difference. And if you have to try to do it rather than just assume the system takes care of it, right?
Yes. I would say as well, actually, within my profession as educational psychologist, I'm part of a initiative for cultural change. I'm part of a group, and we have like reflective spaces for people who are marginalized or who would not normally be in the profession or would not normally see themselves represented in our profession. And we use that space just to try to help with a bit of coaching and yeah, just helping applying for the actual doctorate as well. So maybe things around that kind of supports.
Yeah, thank you. Jonathan, you've raised a fist, hand, palm.
Hi, Jonathan.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Thank you. Tiffany, thank you so much. That was such an amazing presentation and a really important body of work. And yeah, just thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it. It aligns with my own research around autism in schools and higher education. And I'm also a parent of an autistic child. And I guess I just had one reflection and one question, I guess. And it was a little bit what you were just relates to what you were just talking about in terms of, say, the diagnostic tools which you use, the DSM or ICD, and how they don't fit with people's they don't fit with the representation beyond, like you said, pretty much a white Western middle class boy. And I guess my question is around what of the Black autistic girls that you interviewed and spoke with, what of their experience wasn't just framed in terms of the difference, you know, how do these diagnostic features present themselves among that population? That's not kind of the question so much as what did they see as being different but positive? Because I think that's such an important shift away from the deficits which we see or kind of represent in the DSM. And for people who are not familiar, that's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. You know, I think it's so important to reframe it sometimes, and particularly for that group in terms of what about their identities were a positive thing that people haven't seen the deficit or the difficulties, but they haven't seen the positive things. And I'm just interested in whether they saw that and what elements.
Yes, thank you for asking that. one of the girls, I think she felt a little embarrassed to say it to me, but she said that she felt she had special powers.
Mm.
And she felt that way because of her empathy, like really feeling and being attuned to other people's pain, what's going on with them. And she was like, oh, it's just like I know what's going to happen, and I've got special powers. And when she explained it to me, I really felt her. I felt myself going into myself as a young child, because I used to feel that way.
Mm.
And I think it's just really about being attuned to people. And when you're in a group but you're not speaking, you're obviously much more observant. So being able to really pick up on people's cues in that kind
Mm.
of way. But that's mainly what she spoke about. One of the other girls, she very, very artistic, really good at drawing, but being able to, again, sort of pick up on sort of nuances with feelings,
Mm.
which was really strange because she was the same girl that said she couldn't name her own
Yeah.
emotions. But they all, as soon as they knew they were autistic, they were all able to accept themselves and
Mm-hmm.
care less about what other people feel, and just be much more creative and seek out their tribe as
Mm-hmm.
such. But yeah, those were the main things, I think, main positive things that
Yeah.
came out.
Brilliant. I mean, I just think it's so important to understand, I guess, the challenges, of course,
Yeah.
and see how they're important within the educational context, but also, I guess, what's to be drawn, which is positive out of that different experience as well, because it is
Yeah.
a different experience, and for that to be a focus, too.
Yes, and I guess that's, with research, when you think about what your focus is and how you frame your research, because my questions were focused around those experiences in school, but it wasn't, I did ask them about lessons that they would give to other children like
Mm.
them, which I haven't shared with you guys today. But yeah, there were positives I picked up on that they didn't necessarily talk about, which was more around kind of their ability at 16 and 17 to be able to self-reflect, which I think is amazing. The things that they taught me a lot
Yes.
older. But yeah, I do think it kind of shows you with research how you frame things.
Yeah.
It's what you get. But yeah.
Fantastic. But thank you so much.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
thank you. And good luck with your
Thank you.
research.
You too.
Um, yeah, thank you. There's a comment, another comment here from Susie that I'll read out that actually leads in. We can reframe this as a question. So,
Okay.
you very correctly raised the issue of everyone having bias, which is true. However, it's the combination of bias and power which seems to arrest the progress of mindset changes. Fear of rocking the status quo is deeply ingrained into the systems and structures. Many black and brown ADHD children are excluded and end up in the criminal justice system. So the issue of zero tolerance is so damaging for a for a whole group of children. Sorry, misread that one. Then the question is okay, aside from being queen for a day, there are only certain things you can do. If you're queen for a longer period, a decade, for example, how do we change that dynamic? I mean, some of that is, as you said, is to do with representation and voice, but also how do we potentially bring about changes in policy and changes in the professions? Because in a way, that's where that's where the power really lies.
Yeah.
Obviously, as you were talking about with Anjani earlier on, there are spaces you can create, but they're marginalized, small on the edge spaces. So there
Yeah.
is agency, but also there's an awful lot of structure, as you talked about. Can you
Yes.
say a little bit more about policy and professions change that would then essentially make for much longer and deep-seated cultural recognition, change, and inclusion?
Yeah, I think Susie is right about the power. I mean, that's really with intersectionality what it's all about. It's that power, having that privilege. Um, and when we think about those forms of identity where you hold privilege and you don't, yeah, that's really what has that impact. But it is about the structures reinforcing and marginalizing people. We want to be able to really try to break those structures down. And that's really where that change would happen. Um, I've written a lot about it in my thesis about not knocking the status quo, how we maintain that status quo because we're taught not to speak about these things. And I think we can see with some of those changes that are happening at the moment in America and the discourse that we're hearing from Trump, how dangerous it is, or dangerous to the status quo, that we do talk about these things and try to raise that awareness. So I really advocate, I think, for my own profession, that we're much more involved with government and policy. And when government talk about consultations, or, you know, who they're speaking to do this SEND reform that they're now speaking about, that professionals like educational psychologists are involved, and we are pushing for that, you know, social justice and pulling down these systems and removing all of these concepts of whiteness and ability. That is really where we're going to see that change. But it's being realistic that this is a hard fight, and we really do need to join together to be able to do that, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, even for someone who's been involved with trying to bring about force, needle for change organizationally, that can be quite hard to do. So at the bigger level, particularly if we do have a lack of diversity and a lack of perspectives, lack of voice, what isn't happening at the ground then also doesn't feed up at the same time.
Yes, yeah. And I think again, when we look at the government, especially our last government, and I'm not trying to get political, but we have to if we want to make change. Our last government had great diversity within the cabinet, but that, what did that do for us? So it's not just what we can see, it's that diversity in thought and everybody being on the same page for change, real, actual change.
Yeah, and that also brings us into the distinction between cultural and racial whiteness, right? As in,
Mm,
um, and yeah, as you say, very much pointed out that it was the most diverse cabinet of all time, but arguably possibly one of the most regressive,
yeah, yeah.
um, in many ways, and that's really, really tricky. Um, I'm going to. There are lots of praiseworthy comments or praising comments. So
Oh,
someone's saying that
thank you.
I work in a school for autistic children in South London. Even from our cohorts, we have a handful of Black girls who have had similar experiences in education and have been traumatized by getting their autism diagnosis. Could you say something a little bit about that, about how the diagnosis system works? I mean, you mentioned DSM-5. I remember that from, I think it was, I don't know what it was when I did my undergraduate degree in the 90s. It was DSM less than that. Um, but can you say a little bit more about how that diagnostic tool works and how it does or doesn't apply, particularly across cultural and intersectional differences, let's say?
Oh, okay. I mean, it recently changed. My daughter was diagnosed under the DSM-4, and then it changed to the DSM-5. Maybe it's been 10 years, um, which meant that, so there were different, you could have autism, you could have Asperger's, and there was something else called PDD-NOS. They changed it, and it's all autism spectrum disorder. Sorry, I can't remember the question now, Richard. I went off.
No, the question was about how or if the kind of diagnostic tool is or isn't useful, or how it does or doesn't work. Let's say you're looking to make a diagnosis,
Mm,
but how does or doesn't it fit? Because of course it's about ticking boxes, but if those boxes are organized in the wrong or different ways, then it doesn't work, right? So
yeah,
how
I
does
think
DSM-5 not work across intersectional differences, for example? I mean, that's really what kind of the heart of your doctorate too, in a way.
it's difficult for me because I don't diagnose. Um, but there are some people I work with who do, who it's when you have a diagnosis, it's done by a few professionals, so they have to make that agreement as to whether you tick those boxes as such. And I guess it's subjective as to whether people think you tick that box. Some of those things around eye contact, there are cultural differences around that. Um, and I would just say, yeah, some of those things can be quite subjective, especially when we're thinking of masking as well. So, yeah, I'm not really sure much what more to add. Richard, with that one. Sorry.
That's okay. That's your next study.
Yeah.
And Claire, actually, who we heard from earlier, and Johnny, I've seen your hand. Claire also said that her assessment was good because the psychiatrist was trauma informed, and that made a really big difference.
Ah,
And of course,
yes.
this is when we also then start to think about trauma informed pedagogy, particularly within education.
Yes. And there's also those assumptions where you may have a child who has been through trauma, they might be a looked after child, and then the assumptions are just made that this is what it is. So we're not going to look any further or think anything else. I think it's really down to the clinician, you know, in terms of some of those assumptions they make and that training and their understanding.
Yeah, and Christina said that Christina Schmidt also said something along the same lines, and that was able to give input about her intersectionality and hypermarginalization.
Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. Anjani? Sorry if I pronounced
Hi,
it.
so, no, it's fine, no, it's fine. Yeah, I'm part of the autism diagnosis team, so I have some insight in terms of how it kind of works from my experience. And I think, unfortunately, currently what I'm seeing is depending on where you work, who you work with, what your values are, your experience of getting autism diagnosis is depending on that. And it's not a consistent approach. So as we know, there's like such a backlog. I think it's 4 years for the NHS waiting time to get a diagnosis. But what they've done is outsource it to a lot of other companies, and when you and you can go through the right to choose scheme, they can get your diagnosis a lot quicker. But depending on who you go with, it's very dependent on how traumatic your experience is, and that's not a good thing. So you would expect as someone, especially a parent, to go somewhere and have everything understood and not have to worry about that. You're putting your trust in the hands of the professional. But from my experience and from what I've seen, it's not the case. And trauma informed and taking into cultural identity and all these different identities, all these different things. I can't find the right word. All these different things are not getting taken into, so they're not. And so when I've worked with psychiatrist diagnosis, it is very subjective, very, very, very subjective when it comes to what meets that marker. So we use the ADOS and we use an ADI. And in my experience, me and the psychiatrist, how the assessment works is we do the ADOS, which is the actual autism diagnosis. I forgot what the other two meant, but that's the formal assessment to support the diagnostic model. And I remember going on the ADOS training and the same thing coming up about, is it trauma informed, is it this, is it that? And you would only, because it's hard to, because a lot of trauma, children that have experienced trauma can display similar characteristics to children that are autistic. And unless you do a thorough case history and you really get into it in terms of speak to parents, speak to schools, speak to everyone, which on what I'm seeing is some companies are offering autism assessment is a very skewed definition of what an autism diagnosis is. So you're not. So realistically, you should be going by the HCPC standards and all of the NICE guidelines and all of that. But actually, there's some companies that are doing it online and that are not even communicating with schools. And then the way you're getting an autism diagnosis is that you're going into a clinic, you're seeing the psychiatrist or psychologist, whoever, two professionals that are seeing your child, speaking to the parent, and that's it. And that's it. That's your diagnosis. but then you have other companies that are doing it properly. And I think the NHS do it properly for
Yeah.
certain places, but it's unfortunately, and I think that's what's really hard as a professional working in this space, is that it's dependent, and you have to, and as a
Yes.
parent, it's really difficult because it's not consistent. And when you're scoring autism, when we're scoring the behavioural characteristics, that's why it should always be done as two people.
Yeah.
But I know that some places they do it one person and they record it and then they talk through it, and
Right.
which is, you know, I don't know what to say about that, but when it comes to such a heavy diagnosis and such a life-changing situation,
Yeah.
you don't really get well, in my personal experience, it's much better done as a whole MDT and a whole thorough and case history, speaking to everyone involved and kind of really going through it, because then I feel like there's a lot of diagnoses that are happening that are just, you know, is this that, or is it something else? Because then based on that, you're not getting the support you need.
You're not getting the appropriate support.
Exactly, you're not getting the appropriate support, and that's what is very difficult.
Do you use the Coventry grid?
No, I've never used that.
Okay.
So I'm only experienced with like the ADI and the ADOS, and I know so that's the thing. In certain places, they'll be using different things, and that's what is really like inconsistent, because you'll go here and you'll use this, but then somewhere else you use this, and so it's very, and everything's very changing. So
yeah,
everything is very much not consistent.
Yeah, which is really confusing. And I think as well, when you're thinking about that subjectivity, is who has the power, because if you're in an MDT, who makes the decision? And if you're someone who doesn't hold power, are people listening to what you have to say, or how does that work?
Yeah, in my experience, you just have to be really bold, and and you do have to challenge. Like, I take my role very seriously in terms of, if I've challenged psychiatrists before, because that's what I'm seeing, and I have the evidence to prove it. So if you have to be very you have to see your role as, okay, I'm advocating for this child, and you have to, even if it scares you to go against the power, and that's what it is, really hard. And it's a lot of the times I've done it. Luckily, I have a very good relationship with psychiatrists, but it is. Well, the first time I did it, I was so scared, because I'm like, you're the psychiatrist, like I'm the speech and language therapist. We know where our hierarchy lies. However, after the first time I did it, and she took everything I said on board, then I kept doing it and kept doing it. And then, our relationship grew better. And then because she had the same role. She wanted to advocate for the child. And we just had because I'm a speech therapist, I'm so in tune with the child. So I'm like, they did like every minor thing, because that's the difference between, especially the children that are masking, even in the assessment. You've got to be really in tune.
Yes.
And then that's where it's really hard though. It's very difficult.
But you're doing it.
Thank you. So are you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, it's really difficult, but also in a way, I mean, there are clearly slivers of hope.
Yes.
In here. There's one last question, because we're sadly running short on time, but Laura Fernandez says, apologies, I'm currently in a busy office, so I can't speak on camera. I work as a speech and language therapist in the NHS in London. Tiffany, the issues we have are that the wider team, as part of the local authority educational psychologists understanding neurodiversity and often using ableist language in their reports. They are often the lead professional, and their reports are taken as the most important. When we addressed this with them, they said that the speech and language therapists need to inform them of these changes. We have since provided training, but also explained that this is not a speech and language therapy movement. It needs to be taken on by all professionals. As an educational psychologist, what suggestions do you have?
Oh, do I go with my initial thoughts?
Go on, shoot from the hip.
Which local authority is this? Yeah, I agree with you. This is not a speech and language therapy. This is not we as educational psychologists, this is something that we should be aware of, and we should be not even moving towards neuro-affirming, but this is part of our role. And I know I work within a local authority, a London local authority, and it's something that we have a working group looking at how we can be more neuro-affirming and thinking about that in terms of reports and language that we're using, in terms of the interventions that we are recommending, making sure that they are neuro-affirming, because we know a lot of things that are evidence-based are still, I think there are, we have some emotional regulation interventions, for example, that rely on a child being able to know what they're feeling, but we know a lot of autistic children struggle with that. So are there other interventions that we can be using? But yeah, this is something that it shouldn't rely on any one department. This is something that we all should be doing. I don't have any suggestions apart from really wanting to know which local authority it is and seeing if there's someone I can speak to do some training. But yeah, I mean, it's not something that is really alien to us. So it's just a real shame to hear that.
Yeah, and I guess I imagine that your inbox will be pinging furiously after this, or your social media. You'll be getting um, all sorts of requests. Obviously, your research speaks to and informs so many of us. So again, 1,000 thanks for sharing your work. It's been hugely insightful,
Oh, thank
marginally
you.
depressing, but also hope at the same time. All of those things. But it's important because if you don't know it, you can't do anything about it.
Yes.
It makes a huge difference. Um, it's just beholden on me in a way now, sadly, to close this session. So thanks again. I also have to say that the next online seminar is on the 19th of March. That's next week, 12:30 again. And the speaker is Dr. Mikateko Matebula, who's talking about higher education immobility in context of socio-spatial exclusion. So she's doing her work in Southern Africa. To everyone who's come, asked questions, taken part, and particularly to Tiffany, thanks a million. And this has been great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being so interactive as well, and your questions, really helpful.
Great, lots of thanks and things flooding up in the chat. We'll send you
Oh.
the chat so you can also pick up on things in there.
Yeah, and I'm happy for people to send me questions and which local authority that is afterwards on my socials or however.
Someone's just downloaded your thesis, by the way.
Oh, do you know, it's so difficult to explain all of it. Obviously, it's a long read, but I would be here for hours. I could talk for days about everything that's in it. And yeah,
Maybe
it's
that's
not
one
an
for
easy
next time.
read. Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, well, again, thank you very much, everyone, and particularly to you, and wishing you all a fab day or rest of the day and rest of the week. Thanks a lot.